Enamelling is all about colour, and the colours that we have here show you something of the huge range of colours that exist, and they really just come in different, very, very small gradients. I have all these lovely colours here, very close colours, reds, which look alike but they're not when they're fired. Purple, pinks, blues and greens, all very slightly, very, very slightly different. Some of the colours are transparent and some are opaque, and that behaves very differently when we fire them. The work I'm probably best known for are these little bags, which I've been making for many years and presenting them in different ways. They're just made in a thin copper and then folded. So looking at older pieces, these were made probably from the 18th century on, with painted enamel and then a beautiful blue fired on top of that one, a transparent colour. These are contemporary works. This is Caroline Del Zoppo, a very well-known Australian enameller. Gudrun Klix, who's actually a ceramicist. So now what we're looking at is very familiar kitchen domestic ware, enamel on steel. And here is a sign, there's a sign of advertising sign for cigarettes, but it used to be, there were signs for all sorts of advertising, but most of all, it's white goods in the kitchen that everybody remembers. They were always enamelled on steel. So I've got some copper here that I'm going to use and put enamel on and fire. This piece I've already stitched with copper wire. It's another piece of my mending work, and it's actually a patch. So this piece is now ready to go in the kiln. I can just handle it like this. It doesn't have anything on the back, so I can put it straight on a wire rack, ready to go in the kiln. So with a nice long fork and gloves, we can put this into an existing hot kiln. So the kiln is about 800 degrees. I put the work in, close the door, and leave it for about a minute. So these little copper threads really look like stitched threads now. The copper has turned black. Copper does when it's in the kiln. It's a fire scale that comes out of the copper, and it's giving me all these black threads. On the other side will also be black. And to clean that up, I'd put it in an acid bath now and scrub it, and then I can work onto this side. So these are some of the finished pieces. So these pieces have had just one or two colours put on them and fired lightly. I don't fire them for very long because the copper is very thin. First of all, I stitched them, made holes, and they're really patches. And they're patches of mending. But these patches of mending have got holes in the middle here. We associate patches with what goes over holes and tears and gashes. In this case, the patches themselves have holes. So, sort of reminds you of children. In 2013, when Yoko Ono had a show here in Sydney, she did a mending piece. She called it Mending for Sydney. When you mend, mend carefully. Think about what you're mending and mend for the world.
The Retracing exhibition has been a good opportunity to divert from my usual practice of painting to create a work in a different medium. It's an idea I've been thinking about for some time, which is how to reflect the pressure on our Willoughby bushland from urban development. I've been so lucky to live in the Willoughby area for 20 years now in Castle Crag, and it's so bushy, and we're incredibly lucky to live in this gorgeous area. And it's managed to make its way into my art practice, of course. And so what I wanted to do with this piece was to reimagine my paintings as a piece of metal sculpture. I've chosen to make the piece in Corten steel, which is a building material very commonly used. And the reason I've chosen this material is because it will rust and degrade over time, much like a big bunch of flowers will degrade quickly over time, and reflecting the cycles of nature. The colour of the rust is one of the colours of the Australian bush, but also the metal is something that is very hard compared to the Australian flowers that I'm depicting. I had to find a new way to imagine the paint in steel. I tried sketching over an image of the painting using Photoshop, but I was unhappy with the solidity of the drawing. Eventually, I cut paper pieces where I wanted there to be steel and laid it out on the floor, recreating the arrangement and piecing the paper together so that it all connected.
I'm in conversation with Denise Oates talking about her work Sugarloaf Tree that is part of the Retracing exhibition at Artspace on the Concourse. Denise, your influence for this work in the Retracing exhibition is Harold Reed Reserve, a local protected bushland area in the Willoughby local government area. Is this place a regular source of inspiration for you?
Yes, it is, because I would go for regular walks there. I just need to get into nature every now and again, well, actually on a regular basis, just to keep some sanity.
What is it about this area, Harold Reed Reserve, that you find so inspiring?
I love the diversity of the vegetation there and the colours of nature. There's so many different greens in the flora, the shapes of the plants and the rocks and the trees and the water, the smells, the light, which is constantly changing, and I love the shadows and reflections. All of that is so inspiring.
How is the area a source of reference for this specific work, Sugarloaf Tree?
Because it's close to where I live and where I work, I love going for a walk there, and sugarloaf is such a great word.
Are there other locations in the Willoughby area that inspire you?
Well, I'm just a sponge for visual inspiration, so everything inspires me. All the street plantings, people's gardens, just everything I see.
Nature is obviously an important influence in your work. What does nature mean to you?
Well, it's the basis for everything. Rocks and plants were here long before we were, so it just seems like the basis.
Tree have a relationship to other works of art you have completed? As in, is it part of a larger series or a particular approach that you are working through at the moment?
It started many years ago when an ophthalmologist curled my eyelids back and I could see veins in front of me, and I said, "I can see veins," and he said, "Yes, that's what happens when we do this." And I was looking at the veins on the back of my eyes, and the shapes were so inspiring. I started on a vascular series of works, and that transformed into leaves because of the vascular systems you can see in the leaves.
Can you describe for us how you made the work?
Yes, I use copper, tube and wire, and I cut it, shape it and silver solder it together, and then apply a chemical patina to turn it the verdigris colour.
Is there a significance of colours for you?
I love those colours, but the green in particular is reminiscent of the nature that I'm inspired by.
Your studio is amazing. Can you tell us about the history of the building?
It was built in about 1890, and it was used as a produce barn until the 70s, and it sold dog biscuits and chook food and bird seed, all sorts of things like that. In the 1970s, a local photographer, Phil Gray, bought it and turned it into a photographic studio. And then in the early 2000s, we bought it and I turned it into a sculpture studio. It's perfect because it has a very large sliding door that opens up onto the driveway that gives me lots of light and fresh air to work in.
Is there anything else that influences you?
I'm open to influence from anything and everything, but I've done a bit of travelling, and so the previous work that I have just finished was inspired by boulders from, I saw it on a trip to the Kimberley, and the grasses that are included, I've included live grasses in that work, and they were inspired by a trip to Japan where I was walking through grass fields, and the branches in that work were also inspired by the Kimberley, just how the plants were growing straight out of the rocks.
The works aren't strictly representational. Sugarloaf Tree is like a motive. Does symbolism play a role in your use of nature in motive form?
Not consciously, but often if I look at a work after I've made it, I realise that that work is a symbol of a particular idea or area. For instance, this work, Sugarloaf Tree.
we're at the Fishwick House in Castle Crag, which was one of the houses in the area designed by Walter Burley Griffin. And the works that I've made for the exhibition are based on windows. I did a drive around the suburb looking at the houses and taking some photos, and the things, like the architecture's so dominating, I guess you'd say. Filming is based on the Fishwick windows and another window from the Guy house. And then the garden is just so magical. I had no idea how gorgeous the garden was. It's just like being on another planet almost. It's just the most beautiful spot. The garden is tiered, and it's got this beautiful little loop walking little trails with all these mossy rocks and stones, and it's heavenly, heavenly. And it all just echoes the stone in the building itself. But the garden it's very unmanicured and very natural, which softens the building itself as well. The garden is just a child's imaginative dream.
The landscape we most deeply belong to, that connects with our senses, that glows in our consciousness, will always be the one we are born into. These words by the writer David Malouf link me to the bush topography and waterways of Sydney's Middle Harbour. It is the landscape I was born into. Saltwater inlets and tidal estuaries, tumbling angophores that cling to the sandstone rock ledges, kids unfettered and barefoot. Viewed on a map, this part of Middle Harbour looks like splayed branches of kelp with a myriad of creeks disappearing into bush. Green-shadowed salt water, seagrass and the grey-greens of eucalypts, banksias and xanthorrhoeas give this landscape a groundscape of greens, relieved only by the sky. The streetscape is all sinewed, twisted and half-cleaved from following the steep contours of the land. The plant life, somewhat like the houses and jetties, has evolved to perch, burrow and anchor into the earth and sandstone rock so they don't tumble down to the water's edge. Water has been shaping this landscape from deep time to the present day, and it will shape its future, though not in ways we may like or yet foresee. Sandstone ridges of the escarpment made from grains of pure silica, carried by the flow of an ancient river system, still wear the south-flowing marks of that Gondwanaland River. Here, once a great freshwater river system stretching from the Blue Mountains to a coastline out to sea. Today, a drowned river valley. Also a place of absence, of loss, of fractured knowledge, of details unnoticed, of things not named and therefore not known. In this exhibition, Retracing, the curator, Cassandra Hardy-Laurie, has selected Series 1 from the Changing Line of Coastline series. This series of 5 screens has their impetus in observations I undertook with the University of New South Wales Water Research Laboratory. The WRL work with wave dynamics, modelling and collating data that reveal rising sea levels and coastal erosion to our coastline as the new markers of climate change. Disruption of pattern, of how knowledge is fragmented and how connections between things are not wholly formed, places this research in the context of the salt waterways and estuaries of Middle Harbour. The movement of water as it seeps down gullies to the estuaries hugging our harbour foreshores, the topographical movement of our bodies through landscape shaped by water, coastal erosion caused by storm-driven waves, drive signal data, sea bees block, luvid holes of the diatom, we, you, words from Greta Thunberg's speech to the United Nations, the hanging bark, a poetic link of water to life. I wonder why it is we don't see connections between things. I wonder that our thinking and thus our language has not developed sufficiently because we have remained distant from the landscape, set above it and apart, rather than an integral part of it. I wonder that as inhabitants of this shared landscape, we are yet to grasp a matured, deep, abiding connection, one developed and honed through generations of activity and observation. Though fragmented, I am telling stories with my artwork about us, about this landscape, so that we may take responsibility for it and care for it.
Hi, my name's Jo Williams. I work across print, installation, photography, new media and projection, and I've always been a big fan of the Incinerator site. So I grew up on the North Shore. I grew up just in Narrabeen, and as a result, I have built an artist community on the Lower North Shore, and I feel very privileged to be working with them on this fantastic retracing exhibition. Actually engage the help and expertise of the Primrose paper makers to help in the production of this work. I'd been introduced to paper making actually in my time as a printmaker and through friends I've met through printmaking, and I saw this project as the perfect opportunity to explore that craftsmanship that is paper making and the kind of endless possibilities that come with paper making. So I thought I would use leaves and plants from the Incinerator site and actually combine that with the white paper pulp and also blueprints of Walter Burley Griffin's projects, is to kind of create a connection between the work and the site in a quite a subtle way.
It wasn't really until my interning days with Willoughby City Council, kind of watching the site transition from a dumping ground to kind of the really vibrant and creative hub that it is now. I've been drawn to the site architecturally and artistically through Walter Burley Griffin's Art Deco geometric aesthetic. The work that I produced for this retracing exhibition is basically a furtherance of some projects that I started years ago, and this has just been the perfect opportunity to explore them and to explore them further and look into projections. So my work is really an experimental exploration of the juxtaposition of Walter Burley Griffin's kind of geometric, the concrete motives that are on the side of the building and the organic shapes of the surrounding landscape, the rocks and the earth. The projection constructs kind of, for me, a second condition of reality surrounding the site. It represents another way of exploring the spaces and the forms and the structures through the depictions of the characteristics of the site, the entropic and the historic resonance, alongside my personal association with the site from my childhood, as I've kind of talked about already, and today.
My name is Sari Yoshizawa and I'm a textile artist, mainly working with natural dye and weaving. So I have lots of many processes before I do my meditative process of weaving, and which is natural dye. So I forage lots of plants, mainly leaves and roots and barks, through my daily life and collect them into a dye pot to make natural colours, which is quite important to my work. So I forage lots of leaves and barks and roots after the wild storm or when there's a gusty storm. So when the branches falls down, I collect all the leaves and take it from the branches and make it into a dye pot. I simmer all the things that I collect into the dye pot, and all the yarns and fabric absorbs all the colours, which makes my abstract landscape in my work. I have lots of eucalypt, wattles and things which are on the ground as well. Sometimes I collect branches, which I'm not sure which trees are from because of the gust and things, but I collect it into a basket, and it's like a kind of more identity within the nature almost, yeah. I lived in Willoughby for almost 20 years now. And Willoughby has been, the nature has been quite of a self-reflecting in a way that I'm an immigrant. I came to Australia when I was 8, and nature kind of became an identity in a way that I'm absorbing the surroundings or the environmental factors as well. So it's like a tree kind of a nature representing the self, that it's a self-reflection, but also the environmental factors are kind of bringing the colours, which you are the colour almost. Well, I live very close to Castle Cove Park, and that's where I usually walk, do my walks. And here we are near the Willoughby Leisure Centre, and this is where I used to swim when I was high school and when I was in my primary years. So it's very close to me. I do walk here quite a lot, and it's just when you walk and all the environmental factors come down, it's just a continuity as well. if something happens, it still continues, it never really ends. But it's same as the nature here. If there's like a bushfire or when there's a storm coming in, even though some of the trees and branches falls down, it revives and it just continues to survive. So it's like a resilience. And with the colours which are in my abstract landscapes, they're more like a resilience of beauty of the colours in nature, and also beauty of our normality as well, amidst of all these crises. It just keeps continuing on. You might think this is a very far away, like a nature reserve, but this is only very close to Willoughby Leisure Centre. With the natural dye, I made lots of abstract landscape, which are like art installations, 2D works, 3D works, and also some scarves and maybe some eco-printed cards.